So today we're starting, and we're going to be talking about the 7 Hermetic principles as found in the Kybalion. And the reason why we're doing that, and I'm going to share screen here with you guys, is because these foundational principles, or these are the foundational principles that lead to greater understanding and correspondences. Okay, so the book, the Kybalion, is very small. It's excellent. You can listen to it on YouTube. I'm sure there's plenty of online versions where if you want to listen to it. The principles that it introduces tie into everything else. It's sort of like a grand paradigm, okay? And the hardest thing to assimilate within this is the nature of the first principle. So there are 7, and we're going to just run through them really quick. Remember, this is just kind of, I'm touching base, and what I'm going to do is introduce this idea, and then I'm going to show you how this idea applies. I'm going to show you where it fits in Kabbalah and how to look at that. Before I get too far, I want to point out and just ask really quick. Let's take a look and see which one of these would be best suited for this. So how many of you here, just by a show of hands or nods, are familiar with this image? This is the tree of life, right? And so specifically how this tree is presented, well, the advanced studies group discusses, meaning that what we're seeing here is a tree where there's monochromatic colors at the top, primary colors here in the next level down, secondary colors in the following level, and then the last little dot here at the bottom, the sphere, is where tertiary colors are found, okay? Each one of these spheres has a name, and they are connected by what are called paths, which are just simple lines. We see that often illustrated more like this, okay? This is a much more complex rendering of the same image. It just simply has a bunch of Hebrew characters and numbers, and it has the tarot cards which are associated with each of those paths. A path exists between 2 spheres known as Sephiroth, okay? And these spheres are organized into worlds. So in triads, which then comprise worlds. We'll talk about that later, but right now it's important to understand that the spheres themselves are presentations of objective reality. So if we're looking at the tree, it's a symbol both of subjective reality and objective reality. So it's what it is like to be in it and what it's like to look at it. It's the macrocosm and the microcosm, right? So the macrocosm is the bigger picture and the microcosm, the smaller, right? So that deals with you personally. One of the principles that help us understand this relationship is taught in the Kybalion. So by understanding that this symbol, this glyph, it's a cognitive thought form, meaning that there are multiple symbols which are comprised into this one. So it's a complex symbol, meaning that in order to decrypt it and understand it, one would want to have an understanding of Hebrew script, basically the 22 unpointed characters. You'd want to have an understanding of basic numerology. The tarot plays a big part in this. You'd also want to understand astrology and how that works into it, and specifically the mythologies about the astrology. So if you see Mars or Jupiter or Mercury, you would want to understand what those bodies, those archetypes are about, because that speaks to the spheres, because each sphere has a different divinity that essentially is the avatar of that point in that place. Okay, let me grab a sip here. So now that you understand this, let's take a look, and we're going to go back, and I'll switch to over here. And we're going to talk about the 7 Hermetic principles. Now, Each one of these principles builds upon the last, okay, and they work in a kind of successive order. Allow me to just remove that so that becomes a little bit easier. So the first principle is one which essentially is the governing paradigm of all substantial reality, meaning that when we look around, our experience, what we see, what we feel, it's really that Morpheus moment in the Matrix where he's like, well, you know, if everything that you see and feel and experience is just electrical impulses to the brain, then what's reality? In Dion Fortune's book, where she's discussing, and we'll talk about this later in advance, but in her book, she talks about how substantial reality, what we experience here, is a denser form of everything else. In other words, that it's presented in layers of density and accretion. So when we're looking at the tree, okay, and the tree of life then is an image of all of reality. All of this is a product of the divine mind, and the tree itself is showing you aspects of the simultaneous functionality of divine mind and how you're in there. Okay, if this is going too quickly, please, you know, ask me to stop or slow down. I'm trying to keep it, and if this seems too advanced, let me know. Okay, so the first principle then is that the all is mind, the universe is mental, everything is essentially energy in various states or presentations, mental energy. And every experience that we have is mental. It means the way that we can see this in the tree is to look at, I don't want to get too advanced here, so we're just going to keep the concept. Just hold on to that concept. It does develop into something more later, but I don't want to keep filling it up with extra stuff and making it heavy. So the idea is that everything that we experience exists within the mind of the all, and we are components and parts of that experience. The second principle is the principle of correspondence. This is a critical principle in understanding anything. The first one is giving you essentially the foundational substrate. Everything you're dealing with is the mind of the all. That is important because it lets you draw a line to primal causality, the thing which makes everything else work. To align yourself to that primal causal force and what it is precisely allows you then to ride upon that force, and as authors like Dion Fortune says, work together with the universe. It's when we work against the universe that we wind up running afoul. And so understanding these principles allow you to work together. The greatest of these ideas then, in terms of its utility, in terms of how you can apply it to so many other things, would be the principle of correspondence. It is much more than the aphorism of as above, so below, and as within, so without. That there is telling you that what we're seeing is like a Russian nesting doll of reality, so that what you see in the very center of that Russian nesting doll is similar in form and function to what exists on the exterior in the largest Russian nesting doll. That each layer is simply building upon the same ideas, the same principles, the same degrees of correspondence. But it's more. It also means that when we are presented with complex symbols, cognitive thought forms like the tree of life, that we can rely upon the fact that if we see the god Mars presented here in Geburah, or the god Jupiter presented in Chesed, we can then assign all of those characteristics that we understand from mythology to that sphere. That works. It was one of the tools that I used as an astrohistorian, someone who looks at the sky and looks at the world around us as a natural philosopher and says, okay, we got to unify all this, and realize that those ancient tales were essentially codifying and storing our actual history, like the interaction of other worlds as seen upwards in the sky. And that those ideas, those concepts, those principles, as experienced by us, are then held within the tree, so that all of the associated symbols with those gods also apply. So that's the utility of the principle of correspondence. It means that if I have a mastery or understanding of what exists here, I can, by extension, apply my consciousness to realms outside of the physical world. I can have some degree of dominion and understanding within the astral realm, because I understand that the astral realm is comprised of the same rules, nuances, and underpinning realities of the material realm. So that knowledge gives me an extraordinary degree of facility then, knowing that for it to exist and for this to exist, there are rules, there are laws, there are principles which unify all of them, even though they may seem vastly different from my own state of being. The next principle is the principle of vibration. And by the way, for the first two principles, they are descriptive of the tree of life in total. So in other words, that all of this, the entire tree of life, is a presentation of the all as mind and the universe as mental. And the principle of correspondence is being presented as the structure. The one is the why. Mentalism is the why. It exists because of this. And correspondence shows you the how. This is how everything is connected. This is how those relationships are important. This is why, for instance, in order to define a thing, you need at least two other things to stand in its presence in order to get a good, solid idea of what something is. You can reflect upon it, but when you have that third-party perspective, you get the additional dimension and nuance. So it explains why the all in the archetypal world would seek its own division into three personas to create reality, to create three dimensions, to exhibit three ideals. And we're talking about that later. But for now, it gives you that. So correspondence, the whole tree, it's represented in the whole tree. I specify that, those first two principles, because they are indeed separate from everything else, which is the operational aspect of the 7 Hermetic principles. The first two are foundational. This is how and why things are. The rest is what things are, what they are doing. Because what they do, like Batman says, you know, what I do defines me, right? That's what I am. If I walk like a duck and talk like a duck and swim like, I'm a duck, clearly, right? So in the same context, understanding what each of these spheres are as we work our descent downward will help clarify the meaning. So, quickie drink. The third principle is the principle of vibration. This means that nothing is stationary. Nothing is at rest. Even when things, and that certain things which are vibrating so intently, they may seem as if they are at rest, sort of like, you know, helicopter props when they spin really fast. It seems like they're slowing down and not spinning at all, right? If you're at the right vantage point. And then similarly, things may vibrate so slowly as to also appear at rest. But no matter what, all things are in motion. The perpetual motion that was created is something that we have discussed in advanced courses, but in the simplest terms, it is exhibited by the imbalance that you see within the beginning of this tree, at the very top 3 spheres. The sphere in the center is typically presented as gray. This is the path in the center, descending from the number 1 sphere to the number 10 sphere, is generally presented as gray and is spoken of as the pillar of mildness. On the side, under the number 2 sphere, descending down, this is the pillar of mercy. And under the black number 3, we have the pillar of severity, right? And it follows that color. However, the white one at the top, one would think would belong over here on the side with the white pillar, but that's not where it is. It's actually at the very top. And this is the mechanism that allows the eternal, perpetual creative activity of the universe, spoken of in 4 simple words. Let there be light. That's it. The universe functions. That is the primal causality of all things. Those 4 words, let there be light. Because from that standpoint, that, and within this upper domain, right, where we have monochromatic colors, we have white, gray, and black, right? No actual color there. From that archetypal realm, everything else is then defined, is put into motion. And we'll talk about this little imbalance here, but that is what is creating the principle of vibration. And so when we talk about that, one has to ask oneself, what is the thing that is a vibration? What is a vibration? There are 3 components that go into the creation of a vibration. And the best example I can think of would be, on the moment, a piano. The piano itself represents, for lack of a better term, the body. The music, which is the person playing the piano, rather, this would be the infusion of spirit into the body, the energetic fire, which then results in the awakening of something new and unique as a result of vibration. And the new and unique thing is music. Music, in and of itself, is a perfect example of what a soul is, meaning that it is something that is unified by 2 things which are separate and by themselves are actually not much of anything, right? The musician without an instrument isn't a musician, and an instrument without a musician plays no music. So the 2 together create the soul of the music, which is the sound, which is the vibration. Incidentally, Jupiter is tied through other mythologies, like the god Vishnu, with the idea of sound, where Vishnu carries a conch shell. So, and we'll talk more about that, but this is kind of a cross-cultural comparative analysis using the principle of correspondence. So I see an identifier that fills the thing, and over time, you'll begin to learn to do this as well, that as you see certain divinities occupy certain job callings, you begin to understand that those similarities are the result not simply of cultures spontaneously deciding the same thing at once, but cultures looking skyward and seeing those divinities enacting their roles, throwing lightning bolts, cosmic lightning bolts back and forth. And those depictions are what then become the substance of these legends and the ideals behind this. That's why including them in here awakens within you upon contemplation, as you understand and you seek out to understand these myths, these legends, understand the avatars who stand in the place of these spheres. It will awaken within you access to the Akashic record. It will cause recollection within you. You will begin to understand and see it. These are the meditations which are written of and spoken of constantly that allow for ascension as you contemplate each of these symbols, which is why for me, the tarot is uniquely excellent for this because of the complexity of each symbol on the card. All right. The next principle is the principle of polarity. This is one that states that everything has a pole. Everything has its opposites. And everything, extremes meet, meaning that love and hate come together in the middle. It's the same energy, it's just simply polarized on the outsides. The sphere in which you would see that reside is here in Qabalah. The reason for this is the god Mars, and the idea of Qabalah as a sphere of destruction and creation. And the idea that Mars with his axe, or Ares with his axe, can take something which is unified and cleave it in half, cut it in half, creating two new things, right? This is a process of creation in cell division. This is a process in creation in every form of life that exists in the universe, where we experience, and this process then is explained later in the descent into Hod, which we'll discuss when we talk about the principle of gender. But here in Qabalah, this polarization is embodied there, and nowhere else quite as well. The next principle is the principle of rhythm. Trying to stay on time here, you guys. So the next principle is the principle of rhythm. This one is seen and occupied in the entire middle pillar, but specifically, it is seen in Tipreth, in the number 6 position, and also in Yesod. Tipreth is the symbol for the sun, that sphere, the sun occupies that. And in the 9th one, in the purple one there, Yesod, it is the moon. And as we know, as human beings on planet Earth, there are no other objects in the heavens which regulate rhythm for us more than the sun and the moon. And so those principles show us all of the things that we must understand, and they explain a unique concept. They allow us, since the existence of this principle and the idea of a pillar of mildness exists within the middle, it tells us that if rhythm is maintained to its eternal perfection, nothing happens. If Chokmah, the gray sphere, works its way, occupies its position as head of the tree, and Keter assumes its position down at the pillar of mercy and the pillar of white, then nothing happens. There is no energy to create the vibration, because this upper archetypal realm becomes a self-contained object. It is the universe pre-Big Bang, where everything is just in a little bundle and it's happy and nothing's changing because it's always in balance. There's never any form of imbalance. The only way that imbalance could have been achieved is those 4 magic words: let there be light. That allowed for a transposition, a switching of the positions of Keter and Chokmah in such a way so that light would prevail as the source. And so that you understand what I mean by that, if you were to have a magic light switch on the wall, you know, those kind that dial so that you can intensify or reduce it, with regard to light and dark, if you were to have the two of those together, no matter how much you crank the dark one, it won't get any darker. It can't. A single match can illuminate an entire cavern in the darkness, but no amount of darkness can suppress the light of that candle or that match. And light, on the other hand, can grow increasingly intense. The only thing that changes then is the light. The darkness represents a deprivation, but it in and of itself is not a thing. It exists as counter pressure to the pressure that is light. The next principle after rhythm is seen in the concept of cause and effect. And in this principle, all of life is begun. It relies upon the three preceding principles acting in concert, so that there is vibration and polarization. Vibration really can't exist without polarization, because vibration is something where it's going up and down, right? The sine wave. Well, that up and down is possible only because of the principle of polarization and the simultaneous implementation of the principle of rhythm that says if it goes up, it must go down. If it goes in, it must go out. So those three forms together result in the principle of cause and effect. And as a result of that, all of time begins, because things now have order and sequence. Things begin and they conclude. And this principle is seen here in Netzig, whose avatar is the goddess Venus, or Aphrodite. She stands in and represents the sacred feminine. She is the threshold through which life is exchanged. She represents the thing that, moment, need a drink. She represents the substance through which all things must be and must pass. In the tarot, she is the Empress, she is the star, she is the world, she is temperance, and she is the goddess Venus. She represents each of these and more because she is the active body of the sacred feminine, as seen through the tree. So cause and effect is also something that speaks to the god Janus, the two-faced god, where one is going one way and the other face is facing the opposite direction. In that instance, cause and effect is ever present. It is always a symbol of the eternal now. It represents both life and death, hence the color green, which is symbolic of both life and death, depending upon your state of health and the state of health of the universe around you. I look outside and I see all this beautiful green plant life, and I think, yes, if I had cut myself in the jungle and see all this green growth on my leg, I think, no, because that's disease and gangrene, and I'm going to be in deep trouble. It's threatening my life with death. So that is, it speaks to the idea that a goddess of creation, or a god of creation, is also a god of death. Because by allowing something to become, it takes it from its formless state and makes it into something which has limitation, makes it into something which can be only that thing and nothing more than that thing. So a bird is a bird and not a fish, right? A dog is a dog and not a cat. So that limitation gives it the principles through which it will then abide. And all of those principles are bound to the idea of cause and effect. So the next principle after this is found in the principle of gender. And this principle is associated with the generation of all things in the universe. It states to the fact that all things are masculine and feminine. And the beauty of its placement within the tree is that the sphere in which it occupies is the planet Mercury. So the god Mercury steps up and says, I can help solve this problem. Hand me your court cards. So the tarot court cards roll in, and when you understand that the court cards are divided into 4 elements, right? Earth, air, fire, and water. Let's just switch that momentarily for you so you guys can see. So each of the court cards are divided into 4 separate elements: earth, air, fire, and water, okay? And each of these elements are tied to a gender archetype. So allow me to explain what these gender archetypes are. There are four. There is fire is associated with masculinity. Water is associated with femininity. Air, again, masculine, and earth, feminine. When combining this idea with the understanding that men and women are men and women, okay, within the tree, then you can have a hybridization of a gender quality. So for instance, and the way we arrive at this is through an understanding of how the planet Mercury operates relative to the sun. In other words, of observing it. It's exactly like the moon is to the earth. Once it's tidally locked, meaning that one side faces the sun, or in the moon's case, one side faces the earth, and then one side faces out into the darkness of space. In the case of Mercury, that really speaks to a great deal, right? Because you have a massive environmental difference. One side is scorching hot and the other side is freezing cold. The side facing the sun could be seen as masculine because of the light side, right? The side facing out into space could be seen as the sacred feminine. Now, planets themselves, all spheres, all life forms, as far as we know thus far, also are divided, masculine, feminine, in terms of functionality, in terms of what we do. Specifically, the northern hemisphere, if you will, the top part of your body, coming in from the top down, right? Everything about your head is receptive. All of it, right? It's all sound comes in, light comes in, food comes in, smells come in. It all is receptive. The guiding concepts of the sacred masculine, sacred feminine are as follows. And this will help. The sacred masculine is attractive and projective. And what I'm talking about is attractive, like to draw things into you, not I'm super awesome and good looking. The sacred feminine is resistant and receptive. It's interesting, when I was explaining this idea to my son, who's a biochemist, he's like, oh, it's just like chemistry. And I was like, precisely, yes, it has to be, because these principles have to be something that speak to actual reality. So in the case of the sacred masculine, then we're looking for something which projects, and the sacred feminine for something which receives, in order to identify which part is which, right? So in the functionality of the body, the upper part of the body, to let's say the heart, could be seen as sacred feminine. Even the arms and hands are designed in a way to draw everything to you, to bring it to you, to receive, right? Or to resist, if the case may be. The sacred masculine is motile. It projects. So everything from the waist down, if you think about it, is an exit point. It projects. We eliminate through that point, and we activate through that point, which means we're walking around. Being passive, feminine; active, masculine. So the legs and the activity of that motility, the capacity to move around, all masculine. So when looking at a sphere, then the northern, and we've learned this recently through analysis with satellite data, that the northern hemisphere of all planetary objects is more receptive than the southern hemisphere, which tends to project energy out. So in the Sun-Earth connection, or the Sun-Saturn connection, which is one of the places we discovered this, the northern hemisphere will often remain cool and is drawing the energy out in, and the southern hemisphere might have hot spots. When we had the Cassini probe going around Saturn, and during its winter, right, the southern hemisphere is facing away from the sun, and yet it was hotter than the northern hemisphere. So that speaks to this. They were like, whoa, I wonder why that is. And then they realized that energy coming from the sun is received through the north and then goes in a torus like this. And this is coaxial. So there is also energy coming in from the south and going up from the north, but this then is that Russian nesting doll working in layers, okay? So when looking at Mercury then, and looking at the tarot, the side facing the sun is masculine. If I were looking at the northern hemisphere then, and I was looking at the sun facing side, that would be a masculine feminine card. So the King of Cups or the King of Pentacles. If I was looking at the dark side on the northern hemisphere, that's a feminine facing side. I would be looking at the Queen of Cups or the Queen of Pentacles, right? So, or Princess, but I'm going to stick with the King and Queen just to make this simple. On the southern hemisphere, facing the sun side, so masculine side, masculine, projective bottom, then I'm looking at the King of Wands or the King of Swords, because it's masculine, masculine. And if I'm looking at the other side, I'm looking at feminine masculine, because it's facing the outside, so the Queen of Swords or the Queen of Rods on the southern hemisphere. This is important because later it'll give you keys. What I've provided for you are keys of understanding for later information. But for now, this is the key to understanding literally every 4-quadrant personality test that you've ever taken in any job that you've ever worked in. I've taken at least a half a dozen of these. And they've just literally borrowed from these ideas, these esoteric concepts, and applied them directly to psychology. And we know this for a fact because both Freud and Carl Jung were adept in this material. And the fact that when Carl Jung went to Freud and said, hey, I'm going to write this book and it's going to be about the collective unconscious mind, Freud was like, please don't. You'll start this whole upsurgence of occult stuff. It'll be going crazy. And sure enough, it did, because he related to us a principle that's taught right here in Yesod. Jung said the foundation of human consciousness is the unconscious mind. The foundation of human consciousness is found in the sphere of Yesod and is ruled by the moon. So it's a rhythmic form of consciousness. But these things, these ideas that we are presented with in the 20th century and today, were actually drawn from much more ancient knowledge. So those are the 7 Hermetic principles as taught in the Kybalion, a quick, brief overview. And they apply then directly to everything else. Like you can use these principles and use them as those little plastic overlays to kind of give you a sense of, okay, this is where I'm at. Understanding how those principles work with each of the spheres then gives you a clearer idea of how those spheres operate with each other. And if you tie it with the archetypes using the principle of correspondence, if you tie it with that, it just opens up even more knowledge. So how's that? Good? Well, fold up. Yeah, cool. So that's just, we're just the basics. There's more, there are more basics. There's lots. We're not done yet. We got weeks of this. So all of it is tied to understanding. I see it as our greatest effort to understand how the universe operates. And the thing that amazes me more than anything else is that by extension, by understanding how these principles operate, all of science has built from this, like real science, like the physics of the universe. Some of the greatest minds that we still rely upon, like Isaac Newton, he was an alchemist and a Kabbalist. He thoroughly understood all these principles. Absolutely. There's zero question in anyone's mind that he practiced alchemy, that he understood Kabbalah, and that he used these to help him understand the principles and write the laws of motion. Because those laws of motion are a reflection of the principle of rhythm, which is drawn from the 7 Hermetic principles and can be visualized in the tree. So exciting. This is the best stuff ever. Well, guys, We only have a few. I got about 15 before the next class, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any briefly. We good?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's nice to hear it all packaged. I've been getting the bits and pieces as we go, and you kind of fill it in the other class, but to come back to the basic part of it is kind of nice, and helps get rooted in, okay, yeah, why are we doing this? And
Yeah.
here it is, right? Yeah. Thanks, Aubrey.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I took lots of notes. I'm going to have to rewatch the video here. A lot of concepts that can, of course, unpack into a million more.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
so
I do the same.
I should have this one out later, I hope later today. So, because this is a good one. So,
cool.
Yeah. I'm so glad I found you.
I'm glad you found me too. I'm delighted.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah.
all right. I'll see you guys later. I've got another class in about 15. So I'll see you guys in class maybe.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.